All right, Ryan. Well, welcome to the podcast. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Well, my name's Ryan Day. I've been in the hospitality industry for well over 30 years now, in management for 25. Mostly in restaurants. Full service was kind of my gig for a long time. Um, I'm in hotels now. This is my first time
Yep.
doing hotels. But what I found is hospitality's hospitality. Obviously, some of the day-to-day operation stuff's going to be quite different than restaurants. But you're still offering a product and taking care of people, so that part hasn't changed. I've spent my career mostly in turnaround management or opening restaurants. So I've also done some consulting for some local restaurants here in town that I've helped them open. I had one guy that he had kind of a quick serve barbecue place, and so I helped him open up a full service one. I think he has 3 locations now. So I've done a little bit of everything in that scope, usually
Yep.
from a, budgeting, helping people get loans, and then turnaround management or fixing stuff. My wife likes to tell me that I'm the John Taffer of restaurants or whatever.
Probably my favorite show, I think.
Yeah, I don't yell at people quite like he does, but I do have to kind of pick him up a little bit.
What's his catchphrase again? He has what was it again?
Oh, I don't know. She watches it more than I do. I can't remember what his catchphrase is, but
John Taffer. I have not heard that in a while because it's now not on TV, and you have to have Paramount Plus to watch Bar Rescue. So,
yeah, we do have Paramount Plus at home, so she must still be watching it.
yeah, it's like loaded. It's just so many episodes in it. That's great. I saw you were at Blaze. Actually, Blaze was one of our first customers at London, actually, and at the Blaze Pizza. So that's cool that you were there. It's kind of a nice little
I had the pleasure of being a part of the group that opened up Blaze Pizzas here in Oklahoma as well as in Arkansas, and I got to spend some time out in Pasadena when the original owners, the Wetzels, owned it. I missed LeBron James by 2 days. He filmed a little YouTube short there where he dressed up as Ron instead of LeBron, and he was like making pizzas. So I didn't get a chance to meet him, so I was a little disappointed with that.
We actually had on the podcast, we had Bill Phelps, who was one of the founders of Wetzel's, the Wetzel's Pretzels. And I think he was one of the first investors in Blaze, I think, as well.
I think so.
Yeah, and he's now running Dave's Hot Chicken, that up and coming, very hot chicken brand. Not really my cup of tea. That's too hot for me. Not a spice guy. But yeah, so I think diving into like the first question that we'll send you is like, what do you think are the 3 biggest roadblocks or challenges in the hospitality space today?
Well, that's a tough one because it really, if you look at Blaze Pizza as an example, Blaze Pizza didn't translate real well to Oklahoma. In terms of it was phenomenally successful in California, but for whatever reason, it just didn't translate to Oklahoma. There were several reasons for that. One, the amount of food that Oklahomans like to put on their pizzas versus how much Californians like to put on theirs. That was the first big difference. But I'd say the biggest challenges, outside of getting financing or the monetary aspect of it, a lot of it is, I'll use the guy that had, it's how do we start? Where do we start? And not having somebody with you that kind of can say like, okay, if anything, don't do this. Yeah. Like I used to tell people, and I still do, it's like, I don't always have the answer of what to do, but I've seen enough of what not to do that can usually guide people in the right direction. And I think that's usually the bigger obstacle is everybody's always looking for the right answers and not necessarily paying attention to the what not to do, where the pitfalls are. So that would probably be one. Then, hospitality, restaurants, ultimately you're in the people business. So if you don't have the right people around you, I've helped turn around probably 17 different properties or restaurants, and including where I'm at now has been a turnaround project. We're up to almost $1 million versus last year in the first year of being here. So a lot of it's just, if you got the right people around you, things are going to happen. If you're just hiring to hire to fill spots, then the odds of you being successful diminishes greatly. So people would be, I would say, the second thing. The third thing is reacting to crises or reacting to issues swiftly and not letting them grow or ignoring them, thinking that they're not important at the time. I've seen too many people kind of ignore things and then it piles up, and then it's like, oh, what do I do now?
Yeah.
You really have to be, the key to success I've seen is being preventative, or seeing things as much as possible before they come, or reacting to them quicker than waiting for it to kind of slap you in the face or whatever. I don't know if I really explained that right, but my thing has been, I try to stay ahead of the game. I try to prevent the issues and fix them before they become those things. And a lot of that comes from seeing what other people did as a mistake. And it's like, okay, I see you're going down this road. I've been down this road before. You don't want to do this. And then reacting to that.
Interesting. And it's interesting you talk about the people. Like, do you think that's a kind of low level kind of people, in the sense like there are people that you need to hire for hourly, or are you talking about like executive kind of like leadership kind of people?
Well, it's the first thing, even in my position right now, I have people who run all the departments. I don't really get involved too much in the day-to-day. So it's critical to have those mid-level people, the right mid-level people, because those are people that are really running the operation for you. I mean, you can have, some 5-star person or somebody with a degree from Harvard, but they've never worked in restaurants before. They got the idea of how this is supposed to go. But if they don't have, if I'm that person, the first thing I do is I go, okay, I don't know how to do this. Okay, I know how to run a business, but I don't know how to do the operation stuff. So I got to go find people that know how to do that, and I can keep them in check by knowing the business aspect of it. Okay, I know this will be successful if we do this, or if we take care of the guests and do this or do that. But they have to know how to do all the functions. So that mid-level is probably more important than having the right executives on board.
That makes sense. And I think, in that sense, then, like, kind of parlaying that into like sort of like, the last like 18 months, it feels like we've been dealing a lot with sort of like hiring at all costs. Now we've moved into like a quality hiring kind of space where like across the board, I think obviously in the post-pandemic sort of place that we move now into more like, how do we like really laser in our targeting on people and actually hire for quality. My question to you is then, like, how do you look at something like retention, which is definitely like a real talking point across all of hospitality now, which is like keeping the people that you have and like training them? Is there something that you try to do to roll out across all of your businesses and in the hotel you're in right now, or like in your experience, in terms of like perks, benefits, or like sort of better behavior processes to retain stuff?
Well, what I found in my experience is that people care more about culture. They don't know they can't put their finger on what that is, but from a business standpoint, it's the culture aspect of it. So if we take a look at what was going on, like certainly in the restaurant business during COVID and even after COVID, a lot of restaurants were closing because they didn't have enough staff, or they were having to close some businesses and they were remodeling those and moving staff over to another one if they had multiple units. And they had all this problem because they weren't maintaining people, or they weren't carrying people. The turnover was so high. And the restaurant that I was in charge of at the time, and I had I think I had 5 or 6 restaurants at the time. The difference there is we had no problems, and the reason for that is that one of the things we instituted was a very tough policy on coming to work. What I found
Interesting.
What I found was people were quitting jobs because every time they went to work, nobody was there, or it was them and like 3 other people. And that's your basic worker. That's the person that's getting the food, making the food, delivering the food. And they just saw that nobody cared. So why should I come to work? Nobody else is coming to work. So what we did with my restaurants is if you didn't come to work, we were getting rid of you pretty quick. So every one of my employees that stayed knew that every time they came into work, they were going to have people there. So I was actually able to hire people super easy, ironically enough, by just telling managers or GMs that we were hiring at the time, or just baseline workers, that, hey, if you come to work for us, I can guarantee you right now, you won't have to worry about being here by yourself. You won't have to worry about being stressed. I'm hiring you to do the job that I need you to do. And it really became less about money and benefits as much as it was they didn't want to hate coming to work.
Yeah.
The reason people were losing so many people is that you got people that are driving to work and they're like trying to think of reasons not to go, even though they need the money, because it was so chaotic. So if you create that culture of, I'm here to support you. You're going to have the right people. You're going to do the job I'm paying you for, not 3 other people's jobs. It's not chaotic. It's not stressful. I mean, it's going to be stressful. You get busy, but it's a busy stressful, not a, nobody knows what they're doing type thing. So we didn't have that problem, and it was kind of counterintuitive. And I could tell by the look on your face, like, really, during the time where you couldn't find people, you're getting rid of people. Yeah. Because
you're the first person that said that to me, probably since I started interviewing all these people, everybody for this pod, because I tend to ask that question, and I love to kind of look back on COVID from people, because it's like everyone has a different experience and a different way of how they thrived their way out of it into, say, 2023. And so it's interesting to hear that you were so strict in it. And it's interesting again, because I did one of these episodes this morning with a guy in Pittsburgh who's in a hotel, as a GM in a hotel there, and he spoke about this exact problem where people just were not showing up, and how difficult it was during that period, and how, I guess he would say that Gen Z in particular are, not to brand the whole generation of people, but he would have a quote unquote strong opinion on their sort of work ethic, and especially in hospitality, where your smile is part of your uniform effectively, and how that he is struggling with to find the right people to do that for him effectively, if that makes sense. So it's interesting that you're saying it that way,
Yeah, and we had a lot of Gen Z people working for us, in that business. I mean, a lot. I would say the vast majority were Gen Z or very young, millennials. But the thing that they wanted was, and maybe you could say this about the generation as a whole, but they're not used to chaos. They're not used to that very unstable, crazy environment. I don't know if saying safe space is a good, but they want to come here and they want to feel like they're here to do what they need to do, and then they go, and they don't want to deal with all the chaos that comes with it. So they want a safe place to work. So, but even throughout my career, what I've always found is culture, schedule, and then pay tends to be what holds people on. Because I've had people stay, I've heard stories of people staying at Subway for 5 years because it was stability. They had their schedule, but they weren't making squat. And we would try to recruit them to come over and hey, you're going to make 3 times more than what you're making now, and they would still stay there. So money, I would say money probably affects people more in my position and higher than it does. I mean, it affects people in the lower rungs, but probably that's not something that's they think it's money, but it ultimately becomes schedule.
I hear what you're saying, and it's interesting. You talk about that retention part. It's a very similar. We had a guy called Michael Beecham on, who's the CEO of Earl Enterprise, and he was saying the same thing about Planet Hollywood. I think he was CEO of Planet. I don't know if that's in Earl or was like in the previous role that he had, but he was saying during COVID that they lost no staff during COVID. And you think like Planet Hollywood, I mean, like why would people stay with the business, especially during COVID when it's shut down, open, shut down? And you were saying the exact same point you were saying, which is like, like the culture comes first, and those people were kind of like, embedded into the culture of the business. A lot of people who'd worked there had worked there for so long that they were able to keep that staff that wanted to come back when, COVID finally reopened and we were finally out the door of it. So it's interesting that you leave it at that because, like, I think to your point, you see a lot of like literature about like, minimum wage or the amount of money that people can make in these roles. But then you see something like Chick-fil-A and kids are dying to work there, and there must be something in the way they treat them now. I know obviously they're not open on Sundays, which probably says a lot about it, but like,
that doesn't hurt.
doesn't hurt. But at the same time, like there has to be something in the culture there. And you know what you were trying to explain it? The phrase came to mind for me, which is it's hard to describe, but you know it when you see it. And I think that's how I would look at something like culture, where it's like these are not like codified rules. It's like a set of behaviors and actions within the organization. And I think about a lot about like Chick-fil-A as an example, or like why they built this brand so much amongst employees, where they have very little sort of hiring problems because there's such a demand for people to work there, which is kind of interesting in the QSR sort of space, But I guess the next question for you, do you think the hospitality job market is strong?
Yes. So I will tell you that when COVID hit, before COVID hit in 2019, I was working full service, and I was offered a position with Whataburger, which is a fast food chain out of Texas. But they're very successful, and they pay extremely well for what it was, and something that just told me like, hey, let's make the leap, even though it's not something I've ever been involved in. But they had one restaurant they just couldn't turn around. It was just, so they hired me to turn that one around before making me an area manager. But and I think they said something like that one hadn't been turned around since the 80s. Like 88 or something like that, according to one of our VPs or something that said that. So, and it was culture that turned that around. That store started making money. We had very low turnover, and people feel differently about the culture piece. But culture for me is holding people accountable, caring about people, and holding them accountable should be first, because then they know that you actually are investing in them.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I give enough about what you're doing right now that I want you to stop so that we can get you where you want to be or continue to move you forward. So one thing I found in that, when hospitality was the only thing that kind of shut down, were some hotels, but fast food restaurants and other restaurants probably came back faster, I think, at least in my anecdotal experience, than some other industries that I saw took longer to kind of get back on board. Some of them didn't do that until this past year, or even 2022, the end of 2022, before they really were back to some sense of normalcy, whatever that may be.
And you think like, kind of coming out the gate, like say where we are today, and, we see inflation like through the roof, and we see, food costs like out of control. You see California with its new minimum wage kind of burden on these restaurants, on like minimum wage, which obviously puts a burden on restaurant hospitality, anyone who hires kind of minimum wage workers, because obviously it increases their costs even more. Do you think like that, what's your view, or do you have an opinion on like what the view of like the market's going to look like for the next, say 3 to 6 months?
I would say, for one thing, this is the most bizarre recession I've ever been involved to, if we're in one. Because, like I said, our sales have been increasing. Every month that I've been here, we've beat the previous month's record, all-time record. So our best January ever was this month, and so on and so on. So, and I saw the same thing even when I was with Whataburger, with the stores that I had. Growth was higher. Now, some of it obviously was due to inflation, but we were only increasing prices by maybe 3 to 4%.
Yeah, margin.
Right. So, but our sales increases were 10 or more percent at some of our stores, if not higher. So people are still certainly ingrained or still invested in the economy in terms of spending money and going out to eat. And so, California is a different animal. I've never worked in California, so I know they have a lot of laws that would probably drive me to move almost immediately. But in terms of how to run restaurants or anything like that, but people have been doing it for years and they're successful, so they know how to do it there. But minimum wage, I don't know anybody that makes minimum wage. I really don't. I can't remember the last time I talked to anybody, because minimum wage, if people don't realize, technically is still $7.25 at the federal level. Now states have changed theirs. Oklahoma hasn't, but Oklahoma hasn't messed with theirs at all, and I still don't know anybody making $7.25 an hour. Yeah. So, I mean, most of my people make 14 to 15, and that's just, normal inflation, wage increases and stuff like that. So a lot of these things still kind of happen organically, but the economy is still moving. I still think hospitality is a pretty vibrant industry. Certainly from a food standpoint, people are always going to want to eat. They may cut back a little bit, but I don't see them getting hit first. So hotels is probably a little different thing, but our conference center has been full almost all year long too. So companies are spending for events. So, I mean, if knock on wood, if we can keep that going, that'd be great. Yeah. So,
Well, no, go on. Sorry,
no, that's it. It's a bizarre economy to dissect and unlike 2008 when they said, "Hey, we're in a recession," and everybody was losing jobs and it was kind of a hot thing. Yeah. Now everybody. So apparently everybody's doing some sort of online something, because we apparently don't have enough workers for anything, and the economy's still growing. So I don't know. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, what, a 3% unemployment? That's insane. Yeah.
Let me ask you this, and especially I'm interested because you're in a hotel now as well. You're saying like you're new into a hotel, having years and years in restaurants. Is like when it comes to like emerging technology. Because obviously you were, say, Whataburger just before COVID, and then boom, right through it and after. So obviously you saw insane levels of technology adoption while you were there. Because I would imagine you probably went from like your dine-in experience to your online, probably like totally like changed, a huge change to even how a restaurant even operates, I'd imagine. So like, I'd love to get your take on like what's like the emerging tech that you saw or that you're seeing in hotels or like in the hospitality space in general that like you're really kind of fascinated by.
Well, to your point, I think COVID really forced people to invest in technologies that they were kind of happy to put off.
Yeah.
And this kind of forced people. So, Whataburger did some online ordering, but they went all into curbside. They went all into online ordering. I think their goal was to get to 10% or more. And I think a lot of their locations, I think they have 800 or 900 of them, were able to get there. So they were pretty successful with that. I know here we use a lot. I mean, we use a lot of different online platforms in terms of how do we judge our competition? How do we get people in the building? How do we attract them? So, going digital on a lot of things. I think we're doing a video shoot here next week in terms of putting some more stuff out on social media. So it's really, I would say, social media and the emerging technologies that have come out since COVID are absolutely critical now for anybody that's running a hospitality business.
Yeah. Well, so like social media, like you or like those kind of influencer kind of content is that what you're thinking, or like?
Yeah. Well, we've done some partnerships, I guess, if you want to call it, with some social media influencers that have come to the hotel, and they've done some reviews for us. We had a local football athlete at one of the universities here who got married and stayed, and him and his wife both were in sports at a pretty high level. And, we did some stuff like that. So that's certainly different than anything I've ever been involved with, as a Gen Xer, I'm pretty tech savvy, but I don't get into the influencer part as much. So we have people
Tell me about
that, but I see the value. I see the value. Yeah.
And do you think, coming in and like kind of turning around, you said you're doing $1 million more in revenue this year in the hotel than you did last year alone. So obviously you turned upside down the operation in the hotel to like get it going again. Was that like, was there much technology adoption into that in those processes, or is it a lot of human processes and hiring processes that kind of helped you make that change?
Well, it's always the human process first. The one thing that I try to tell anybody, if I'm explaining it to a client or I'm explaining it, to my team, we have to fix the four walls first. Because there's no point in bringing influencers in. There's no point in doing emerging technology. There's no point of putting us on the map if the product that we're offering within the four walls is not a complete product. Yeah. So it's always a people thing first. We got to get the right people in the right positions. We have to make sure that they understand what the goal is and what the culture is. And then we got to get buy-in from them. Not to mention, we've had to probably spend, over $250,000 on fixing up some things and getting them back in here so that we can make sure that when our guests come, they don't see anything. The worst thing I've always told clients, when I was doing consulting is, yes, we need to do marketing. Yes, we need to get people to come in. But if you don't have your house in order, all you're going to do is convince people who maybe had been there before and now they remembered why they didn't want to come back, or new people who don't know any better. Now they're like thinking this is the way it is, and then they don't come back. So it's always a four wall thing first. Get that culture right. Get the product where it needs to be, and then go all out on those things, because then you're going to get word of mouth. And obviously, social media makes word of mouth so much easier than it did before we had that.
That's awesome. And I have one last question there for you, Ryan, which is, I guess we've kind of alluded to it, but it's like, emerging trends that you see in what's happening to the operation of like a hotel. Like in restaurants, obviously, we're just talking about, you mentioned curbside, places that reduce staff. People are looking like robotics now, keyless entries, to hotels. Are there trends in the operation side of things that you're seeing that are like, okay, you're excited to implement in the hotel, or that you see in the business, in the space itself over like the next 12 months?
Well, the biggest thing that we've invested time and money on in terms of emerging products is just better point of sale type items, better guest experience, certainly from an online standpoint, making it easier for people to book rooms, or comment or get help. So that's kind of products that already exist. If there's something coming down the pike, either in restaurants or hotels that's newer than those items, I haven't seen that yet, but I am a big fan. I would say my generation, certainly, we grew up with, I had computers in our classrooms when I was real young. They don't look like the computers that we have today. They're much different, floppy disk and whatnot, but
drives.
Internet, I had, when I was in high school and going into college, so I was much slower than now, but I think you have to be willing to embrace and certainly look into emerging technology and embracing it. The more business conservative side of me tends to be like, all right, I'll see if somebody else does it, and if it goes well or not, then maybe I jump in.
That is fair.
But because some things, maybe I'm a kid of the .com bubble. Everybody jumped in on that right away, and and then it was kind of a bloodbath, and then people kind of figured it out. So there's benefits to being first, but there's also benefits to letting somebody else do the beta on it. And then come in behind them. So, but I'm not aware of anything right now that's got me truly excited about any of that, other than some platforms we're currently using that makes it easier to see what other people are doing and adjust.
And are there any sort of like trends you're seeing just in terms of the way the workforce is like operating itself? You know, like we see like restaurants, for example, have like different opening hours now, you know, accommodating more flexible schedules for people like Gen Z don't want to work at weekends apparently. So, you know, like how do you like have more flexible schedules for them? Or how do you think about, you know, solving the line at the concierge, for example, and speeding up that kind of stuff, like that kind of thing? Is there anything that kind of comes to mind there?
Well, I do think flexible schedules are huge, and that is something I've always been a fan of long before COVID or anything else happened. I think some of the experimenting I've seen with, or I've certainly read about or seen on podcasts, you know, whatever, that people tried, I think they were forced to try it during COVID. My experience is probably a little different because whether it was here or Whataburger or anywhere else, I wasn't having a real problem with turnover, thank God. And I think so. Yes, we tried to be flexible with people, and we certainly try to hire for the roles that we need. But you know, we paid well, we treated people well, and we did try to make sure that they had the schedule they want and the flexibility they want. But I don't know that that's anything different than what we were doing before COVID. I think people who don't sometimes have that culture piece in place are struggling with, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? And they just don't understand that it's not so much as the schedule for them, which is important to people, but you know, how do those people feel as they're driving to work? Are they like, hey, I'm going to have a good day, or hey, I really can't wait for this day to be over, and they haven't even gotten there yet? So that's that's the part I try to solve, is that, you know, I'm not saying that all my employees just love coming to work. I want to imagine there's probably a few that don't, but the majority of them know that when they get here, it's not going to be like they want to throw their name tag up and say, I'm out of here type thing. Not something I run into the problem. I think the workforce, I've been saying this for years, we all complained about the millennials, and then we all complained about Gen Z. There's a lot of really great people in both of those generations. Hell, the boomers complained about Gen X, you know. So
we complain about the boomers.
So nobody likes the generation below them, but all my leaders, actually, for the most part, are in their 20s.
Really?
Yeah. So all my direct reports, you know, my assistant general manager, my sales manager, my director of sales is closer to my age, but most of my people in charge of the biggest departments are all in their 20s, and we've been able to be successful.
So that's like, I'm
good.
No, I think that's like an indication of, like, going back to you saying, like, your culture play, not a culture play, that's the one way of phrasing it, but the way your culture engenders itself through your employees, that they're able, presumably they're graduating up to those roles because they're good and they like their job and they like coming in and they like taking that responsibility. Like, you're not hiring those 20 something managers, presumably, like, as a manager, they're graduating into those roles. Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, I look for people who want more than what they have, or want to grow. And then I will grab those people, because most of them have not done the jobs that they're doing right now before. So they have no management experience. I can teach them how to manage. I can't teach them how to want to manage.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I differ. And you know, the one thing I tell, the popular question when I would always be interviewing for management positions was, you know, what's your strengths and what's your best strength and what's your worst weakness, or whatever.
Yeah.
I always said people are my best strength and my worst weakness, because if you think that you've figured out how to manage people and you're not doing anything to keep up with how to manage people or change somewhat with the times, you're going to have some rude awakening. So the fact that I can say, hey, I don't know everything and I'm going to have to learn it as I go continually, I think has done me well.
Yeah.
With that. And, you know, if I'm not threatened by people smarter than me, below me. I actually look for those people like, hey, do you know how to do this? Great. Let me hire you because I don't.
Totally. I mean, it's a team game, you know, it's not like, this is not the Olympic 100 meters by ourselves, you know, this is very much team sport.